The beautiful woman on the shore was gone. In her place was a creature that was both amazing and scary. Her lower body was like a huge fish with shiny scales in the dirty water. Her upper body was still human, but her eyes glowed with a strange light, and her hair moved around her head like living snakes. Now, her voice echoed in his mind. Let us see what you're truly made of. It wasn't for long before the four friends got to the river where Amara was waiting for them, holding the wooden box. But this time, she wasn't alone. Next to her stood the most beautiful woman Adebola had ever seen. Her skin was dark and smooth, her hair full of tiny braids with cowrie shells. She wore a colorful wrapper, and her eyes were as deep and mysterious as the river. "My children," the woman said, her voice sweet, "I'm so pleased with your game so far, but today we will make it more interesting." Adebola knew right away that this was Mami Wata. He could feel her power, drawing him in even though he wanted to run away. "Today," Mami Wata continued, "you will not just reveal truths or complete dares. Today, you will make choices, and these choices will have consequences." She gestured to Amara, who opened the box. Inside were shiny river pearls, black and white. "Choose wisely," Mami Wata said. "For each choice you make will affect not just you, but those around you." Yetundé was the first to draw. Her hand shook as she pulled out a black pearl. Mami Wata's smile grew wider. "Ah, a dare," she said. "Your challenge, dear Yetundé, is this. Push one of your friends into the river. If you do, I will erase your past mistakes. Your cheating will be as if it never happened, but if you refuse..." She left the threat hanging. Yetundé looked at her friends, tears in her eyes. I can't," she whispered. "Are you sure?" Mami Wata asked. "Think of your future, all your hard work erased in an instant, unless..." Yetundé's eyes hardened. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Chiamaka, pushing her hard. Chiamaka stumbled, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal, before falling into the river with a splash. "Excellent," Mami Wata purred. "You see, the game is much more interesting when the stakes are real." As Emeka helped a sputtering, angry Chiamaka from the water, Adebola felt his world change. If Yetundé, sweet, studious Yetundé, could be pushed to betrayal so easily, what hope did any of them have? The game continued, each challenge more twisted than the last. Emeka had to choose between revealing Chiamaka's biggest secret or drinking water from the river that they all now knew was far from normal. Chiamaka, still mad at Yetundé's betrayal, was given the option to remove one player from the game completely. And Adebola was given the hardest choice of all. "Tell me, dear boy," Mami Wata said, her eyes staring into his soul. "Who among your friends do you think is most deserving of my special attention? Choose wisely, and I will grant you your heart's desire. Refuse, and you will take their place." Adebola looked at his friends. Yetundé, guilt and defiance in her eyes. Emeka, trying to stay calm even as fear showed. Chiamaka, angry and hurt, but still fighting. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. "Me," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. "I choose myself." Mami Wata's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in thought. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very interesting indeed." Mami Wata's laughter rang out across the water, a sound both beautiful and scary. "Oh, brave Adebola," she said, circling him like a predator. "Do you truly understand what you're offering?" Adebola stood his ground, even though his heart raced. "I understand that I won't sacrifice my friends." The water spirit's eyes flashed dangerously. "Noble sentiments, but nobility has no place in my game." She snapped her fingers, and suddenly Adebola found himself unable to move, stuck in place by an unseen force. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," Mami Wata addressed the group. "There is no room for heroes here, only survivors." With a wave of her hand, water rose from the river, wrapping around Adebola's legs and slowly pulling him towards the water's edge. He struggled against the invisible bonds, panic rising in his throat. "Stop!" Chiamaka cried out. "Please don't hurt him!" Mami Wata turned to her, eyebrow raised. "And what would you offer in exchange for his safety?" Chiamaka hesitated for only a moment before standing tall. "Anything, take me instead." "Chiamaka, no!" Adebola shouted, but his protests were ignored. Mami Wata's smile was sharp. "A noble offer, but I think not. You see, Adebola has made his choice, and in my game, choices have consequences." With a final tug, Adebola was pulled into the river. The last thing he saw before the dark waters closed over his head was the horrified faces of his friends. Underwater, everything was quiet and strange. Adebola held his breath, fighting against the current that pulled him deeper. Just as his lungs began to burn, he felt a presence behind him. Turning, he came face to face with Mami Wata in her true form. Gone was the beautiful woman from the shore. In her place was a creature both beautiful and scary. Her lower body was like a giant fish, with scales shining in the dark water. Her upper body stayed human, but her eyes glowed with a strange light, and her hair moved around her head like living snakes. "Now," her voice echoed in his mind, "let us see what you're truly made of." As Adebola struggled to hold his breath, Mami Wata circled him, her fishtail moving her easily through the water. "Your friends above think you're drowning," she said, her voice clear despite the water. "And maybe you are, but death is not the only thing that can happen in my world." With a flick of her tail, she sent Adebola spinning through the water. He expected to hit the riverbed, but instead he found himself in what looked like an underwater cave. Strange glowing plants cast an eerie light over the scene. To his shock, Adebola realized he could breathe. "What is this place?" he gasped. "This is where the real game begins," Mami Wata replied, her form shifting and changing like light on water. "You offered yourself instead of your friends. Now, let's see if you're worthy of such a sacrifice." She pointed, and 3 paths appeared in the cave wall. "3 tests await you, Adebola. Complete them, and you may save yourself and your friends. Fail, and you will join the countless others who have become part of my river." Adebola swallowed hard, looking at the 3 paths. "And if I refuse to play?" Mami Wata's laugh was like ice water down his spine. "My dear boy, you're already playing. The only question is whether you'll play to win." With no other choice, Adebola squared his shoulders and approached the first path. As he stepped through, he heard Mami Wata's voice one last time. "Remember, in my realm, nothing is as it seems. Trust your instincts, but question everything." The path closed behind him, leaving Adebola alone in a new underwater room. Here the water was crystal clear, and at the center of the room stood a pedestal with a simple clay pot. A voice, neither male nor female, echoed through the water. "Your first test is one of truth. The pot before you contains your deepest, darkest secret. Speak it aloud, and the test will be complete. But be warned, lies have a way of drowning you here." Adebola approached the pot carefully. As he looked inside, he saw not water but swirling mist that slowly formed into images. He saw himself as a child, standing over a broken vase, blaming his little sister for the accident. He saw himself in secondary school, cheating on a test by looking at his seatmate's paper. But deeper down, he saw the secret he'd buried so deep, he'd almost convinced himself it wasn't true. Taking a deep breath, Adebola spoke. I'm in love with Yetundé. I have been since the day I met her, but I've never had the courage to tell her, and now I'm afraid I never will." As soon as the words left his mouth, the pot crumbled to dust, and the path to the next test opened. "Well done," the voice said. "Truth is the foundation of all things. Remember that as you face what comes next." Adebola entered the second room, his mind still spinning from the confession he'd just made. This room was darker, lit only by the faint glow of glowing algae sticking to the walls. In the center of the room stood 3 statues, each showing a different animal: a lion, an elephant, and a tortoise. The voice spoke again. Your second test is one of wisdom. Before you stand three great beings of African folklore. Each holds a lesson, but only one holds the key to your next challenge. Choose wisely. Adebola approached the statues carefully. The lion stood proud and fierce, its stone mane seeming to ripple in the water. The elephant was a mountain of strength, its trunk raised high. And the tortoise, small but intricately carved, seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. He thought back to the stories his grandmother used to tell him. The lion was often a symbol of courage and leadership. The elephant represented memory and wisdom. But the tortoise, in many tales, the tortoise was the trickster, the clever one who outwitted even the strongest opponents. Remembering Mami Wata's warning that nothing was as it seemed, Adebola made his choice. He placed his hand on the tortoise statue. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the statue began to move, its stone surface rippling like water. It grew and changed until Adebola found himself face to face with an ancient, wise tortoise as big as a car. "Ah, young one," the tortoise said, its voice creaky but kind. "You have chosen wisely. Tell me, what lesson do you think I have to teach?" Adebola thought carefully before answering. "That appearances can be deceiving, that true strength often lies in wit and wisdom rather than brute force." The tortoise's wrinkled face broke into a smile. "Very good, but there is one more lesson, perhaps the most important of all. Can you guess what it is?" Adebola frowned, thinking hard. What else did the tortoise represent in the old stories? Then it hit him. "Patience," he said. "The tortoise teaches us the value of patience and perseverance." "Excellent," the tortoise exclaimed. "Remember this lesson well, for it will serve you in the trial to come. The path ahead is long and fraught with danger. But with patience and perseverance, even the slowest among us can reach the finish line." With those words, the tortoise dissolved into a swirl of bubbles, and a new passage opened in the cave wall. "You have passed the second trial," the disembodied voice announced. "But be warned, the final challenge will test you in ways you cannot imagine. Brave yourself, Adebola, for the greatest trial is yet to come." Taking a deep breath, Adebola stepped through the passage, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The third chamber was unlike anything Adebola had ever seen. It seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, filled with swirling currents and shifting colors. In the distance, he could make out faint shapes moving in the water. Were those other trapped souls, or merely tricks of the light? "Welcome to the heart of my domain," Mami Wata's voice echoed around him. She materialized before him, her form constantly shifting between woman and sea creature. "Your final trial is simple. Find your way back to the surface." Adebola looked around, bewildered. "But how? There's no way to tell which way is up in here." Mami Wata's laugh rippled through the water. "That, my dear, is the challenge. In life, we often find ourselves lost, unsure of which way to turn. It is in these moments that we must trust ourselves and make a choice." With that, she vanished, leaving Adebola alone in the vast, confusing space. He tried swimming in various directions, but the swirling currents quickly left him disoriented. Every time he thought he'd made progress, he'd find himself right back where he started. Hours seemed to pass, and exhaustion began to set in. As he floated, catching his breath, Adebola thought back to the lessons of the previous trials. Truth, wisdom, patience. How could he apply these here? Then a memory surfaced, a physics lesson from school. Objects in water naturally rise or sink based on their density. If he could just relax and let his body's natural buoyancy take over. Taking a deep breath, Adebola forced himself to go limp, clearing his mind of fear and doubt. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to rise. As he ascended, the water around him grew lighter. He could see the surface now, a shimmering barrier between water and air. With a final push, he broke through, gasping as he felt air on his face for the first time in what felt like days. He found himself back at the riverbank, where it had all started. His friends were there, looking shocked and overjoyed to see him, and standing at the water's edge was Mami Wata, a look of grudging respect on her face. "Well done, Adebola," she said. "You have passed all 3 trials: truth, wisdom, and faith in oneself. These are the keys to navigating not just my realm, but the turbulent waters of life itself." She turned to address the whole group. "The game is over. You are free to go. But remember the lessons you have learned here. For in the great game of life, there are always more challenges waiting." With that, she dissolved into mist, leaving behind only the gentle lapping of the river against the shore. The journey back to Lagos was a quiet one. Each of the friends was lost in their own thoughts, processing the incredible events they had experienced. It wasn't until they were back in the familiar hustle and bustle of the city that they finally began to talk. "I still can't believe it all really happened," Chiamaka said, as they sat in their favorite campus cafe. "If it weren't for these..." She held up her wrist, where a pattern of scales had appeared, a permanent reminder of their encounter with Mami Wata. Yetundé nodded, absently rubbing her own mark. "I keep thinking about the choices we made, the truths we revealed. How can we go back to normal after that?" "Maybe we're not meant to," Emeka mused. "Maybe the whole point was to change us." Adebola had been quiet, but now he spoke up. "I think you're right, Emeka. We've been given a second chance in a way. A chance to live more truthfully, more wisely." He turned to Yetundé, gathering his courage. "Which is why there's something I need to tell you. Yetundé, But before he could finish, Yetundé leaned in and kissed him softly. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "I know," she said. "I've always known. I was just waiting for you to find the courage to say it." As their friends cheered and teased, Adebola felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He glanced out the window, towards the distant river. For a moment, he thought he saw a familiar figure in the reflection, smiling enigmatically. But when he blinked, it was gone. Life would go on. Classes would resume. Assignments would be due. And the everyday challenges of university life would return. But Adebola and his friends would face it all with new perspective, new strength, and the unshakable bond forged in the crucible of Mami Wata's game. And somewhere out there, in the depths of Nigeria's rivers, an ancient spirit waited patiently for the next group of players to stumble into her realm. For the game, like the river itself, was eternal.